They thought they could break me with rules, fines, and threats. But when the HOA crossed the line and touched what was mine, they unleashed something they couldn't control. One moment, they stood proud, confident their power was untouchable. The next, they watched in shock as years of their arrogance came crashing down, one decision at a time. This isn't just a story about neighborhood drama. It's about what happens when the people who think they own everything finally face someone who refuses to bow down. The question is, who really paid the price when the dust settled? I never asked for trouble. For years, my life in the neighborhood was quiet, predictable, almost ordinary. I bought the house for the same reason most people do: safety, comfort, and a place where family and friends could gather without worry. The street was lined with neat lawns, freshly painted fences, and the kind of silence that feels like security. At first glance, it seemed perfect. The kind of community where nothing ever really goes wrong. But that's the trick, isn't it? Perfection has a way of hiding the cracks. The HOA presented itself as a guardian of standards, a group that kept property values high and everything under control. They sent out glossy newsletters full of cheerful promises about community pride and shared values. And in the beginning, I believed them. I played along. I trimmed the hedges on schedule. I paid my dues without complaint. And I waved politely at the board members who strutted down the street like minor royalty. It wasn't until I started noticing the small things that my view began to shift. A neighbor fined for leaving her trash cans out an hour late. A single father harassed for painting his front door a shade too bright. An elderly couple told their bird feeder disrupted the uniform appearance of the street. At first, these seemed like isolated incidents, tiny disagreements blown out of proportion. But they stacked up, one by one, until a pattern began to emerge. The HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood. They were controlling it. And while I told myself it didn't concern me, that if I just kept my head down, I'd be fine, I knew deep down that it was only a matter of time before they turned their attention to me. That moment came sooner than I expected. It started quietly, almost harmlessly. A letter in my mailbox, a notice on my door. Simple words typed in bold print that claimed I had violated community standards. First, I laughed. Surely it was a mistake. Surely they'd correct it once I pointed out the error. But I underestimated them. What began as a warning would soon grow into a battle that would consume not just my home, but my peace, my freedom, and my future. Because in this neighborhood, the rules were never about fairness. They were about power. And once the HOA had me in their sights, they weren't about to let go. At first, I told myself the notice on my door was nothing more than a clerical error, a typo, some intern in the HOA office who checked the wrong box. But then the second notice came. This one wasn't so polite. The tone had shifted. Suddenly, I was being accused of disrupting the uniformity of the neighborhood. The letter claimed that my property was in violation of community appearance guidelines. What was the violation? According to them, the shade of my shutters wasn't the one approved by the board. The difference, a fraction of a shade, barely noticeable to the human eye. But they noticed, and they weren't about to let it go. I repainted. I complied. I told myself it was easier to bend than to fight. But compliance only fed the hunger. Within weeks, a new notice arrived. This time, it wasn't about shutters. It was about landscaping infractions. My grass, they said, was too long. The problem was laughable. I had mowed the day before. Still, the letter came with a fine, $50. $50 may not sound like much, but that wasn't the point. The fine wasn't about money. It was about control. When I paid it, I thought the issue was over. But they smelled blood. Next came the driveway. They claimed it had cracks that disrupted the visual harmony of the block. They demanded I resurface the concrete at my own expense. That wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. The cost? Thousands of dollars. I refused. The fines doubled, then tripled, and when I pushed back, they escalated. They sent inspectors to my home. Not once, not twice, weekly. They circled my property like vultures, snapping photos, jotting notes, peering over fences as if they were looking for proof of a crime. My mailbox overflowed with violation letters. Each one bolder, nastier, more invasive. The harassment spread beyond my property. They whispered to neighbors. They told them I was bringing down property values. Some people believed it. Others stayed silent out of fear. The sense of community I once cherished twisted into suspicion. Sidewalk conversations stopped when I walked past. Friendly nods turned into cold stares. The HOA had turned me into an outcast. And then, they crossed the line from petty to outrageous. One morning, I woke up to the sound of construction. Not on my property, but next to it. Only, next to it wasn't accurate. When I walked outside, I saw heavy machinery parked squarely across the property line. The HOA had authorized contractors to start building community additions. Small homes, rental units, on my land. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. No one builds on someone else's property without permission, right? But when I demanded an explanation, the HOA president smirked and handed me a stack of papers. Survey adjustments, they called it. According to their records, a portion of my land wasn't mine anymore. It had been absorbed into the association's development project. I felt the blood drain from my face. My land I had paid for, cared for, maintained for years, had been stolen on paper. And now, on the ground, the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as frame after frame went up. Within months, 35 brand new houses stood on soil that legally belonged to me. Families moved in. They decorated. They painted. They planted gardens. And with every passing day, the theft became harder to undo. I tried everything. Letters, phone calls, lawyers. But the HOA wasn't a group of amateurs. They were well-funded, connected. Every legal door I knocked on was slammed shut. Every official I reached out to shrugged, saying it was a civil dispute. They dragged out paperwork, buried me in technicalities, and made sure any attempt to fight back would bleed me dry. And as the houses rose, so did their arrogance.